Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
I sort of felt like I was able to loosen the strictures that I had set for myself.
But kept it funky.
Kept it funky.
Yes.
You know, it has to have funk, you know?
Oh, I think that might be the headline for this episode. It has to have funk. I love it. Hi, Deesha.
Hey, Dawnie.
And welcome, everyone, to Ursa Short Fiction, the podcast where we geek out on our favorite short stories. I'm Dawnie Walton, author of the final revival of Opal and Nev.
And I'm Deesha Philyaw, author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
As always, this show is produced with support from you. Become an Ursa member today by going to ursastory.com/join. You'll get exclusive bonus episodes and you'll help fund future stories and conversations. Today, we're excited to welcome Rion Amilcar Scott, author of the story collections The World Doesn't Require You and Insurrections, which was awarded the 2017 Penn Bingham Prize for debut fiction and the 2017 Hillsdale Award from the Fellowship of Southern Writers. He teaches creative writing at the University of Maryland. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Kenyon Review, and Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2020, among other publications. So, Deesha, we had such a good time talking to Rion.
Yes, he's a lot of fun.
He's so much fun. What can you tell the people about this writer?
Yeah, so first, I'm just going to gush. I'm a huge fan. So pre us having this podcast, pre everything, pre-pandemic, I was a huge Rion fan because he was writing. His writing is so inventive. That's the first of all. And as you'll all hear in this conversation, it's funky. It has a funk to it,
Yes.
And he's writing satire, which that caught my eye in particular and was something that I wanted to try my hand at. And so I have been enjoying and reading Rion as a fan and also as a fellow writer. And, he's one of those writers that just make you want to try new things and make you want to try your hand at doing what he's doing. And the playfulness.
Yes.
And there's so much playfulness and joyfulness in his work, even as he's writing about heavy topics around race and gender and history.
Exactly. He never forgets in the heaviness, the joy, and he never forgets as a writer that it's supposed to be fun. And I was very inspired by the things he talked about, how he shakes up his process. If something's not working, then he'll go off on another riff until something clicks in and suddenly it's jazz again. It's improvisational. It's fun. It's surprising to the reader and to himself.
And I love, and you all will hear this, his influences are so wide-ranging. Their musical influence. August Wilson, a playwright, influences his work as well. And you can see that, you can feel that in his stories.
And Wu-Tang as well. He talks a lot about hip hop. This conversation is just so rich and delightful, and we're so excited to share it. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Rion Amilcar Scott. Rion Amilcar Scott, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Oh, man, it's such a pleasure to be here. I love this show.
Oh, thank you so much.
You.
I mean, it's just like a mutual fan club today.
Absolutely.
We have been just so thrilled to talk with you and talk about your brilliant work. And so I just want to say, there's such a playfulness and imagination in your fiction. And yet your stories are also rooted in a lot of realities, right? I mean, you're writing about race and class and gender. And I was curious, as I was reading The World Doesn't Require You, I went to do a little research on it. And the Googles classified it as magical realism. But I was thinking of it as so many other things as well, like satire. And so I'm just curious, Rion, how do you describe this very unique thing that you do? What would you say makes a Rion Amilcar Scott story?
I think there is an element of like surrealism. There's always an element of weirdness, even in my more grounded stories. There's always something kind of just off kilter, and I'm kind of trying to be honest and true to how I see things and how I've always kind of felt. I think that's what's happening. And you said there's a certain level of playfulness, and that I think that just comes from, this is an extension of what I used to do as a kid and playing with toys and stuff like that. So, I think it all comes from that.
Mm-hmm. So all of us, we're in the business of writing fiction, and yet you tell me if this happens to you. There are times long after your work is out in the world, published, when you see things play out in real life, just like they do in your novel or your stories or whatever fiction you happy writing. And maybe it's like you see, your characters reflected in the real world. I'm always, when I'm out and about in Brooklyn, when I see older Black women with a certain style, I say to my husband, oh, there goes Opal. Look at Opal. But then sometimes you'll see elements of your stories themselves playing out in reality. And I was very astonished when I was reading The Nigger Knockers. We do spoilers on this show, so y'all read the book, come and listen.
I'm a big fan of spoilers.
Yes. So there's a moment in that story when a young Black man suffers dire consequences for knocking on the wrong door in his own neighborhood. And the details aren't exactly the same, but I could not help but think of the story about Ralph Yarl and what happened to him.
Wow, yeah.
And I can't really articulate a question necessarily, but I'm just curious your reaction when these things you're writing in your fiction, you see them reflected in real life, or if that happens to you.
Yeah, I didn't even make that Ralph Yarl connection until you just said it. And I think that there's, there's just so much that happens in Black life that constantly recurs. I was working on a story that was in McSweeney's. I forgot the title of the story, but anyway, the character's name was Floyd, and he had been lynched and he had been burned, and this was right before George Floyd was murdered. And at first I was like, maybe I should change the name of this character. And then I said, no, this is, if I change the name, then the next guy who it's going to be the name of the next guy. There've been two people with the last name Scott, prominently murdered by police.
Right.
These things that happen in Black life, they keep coming back. And I think sometimes smaller mundane things come up in real life, and they can be a delight. Yeah. But I think it's kind of what happens when you're sort of tuned in when you're writing. The weirdness of the world is just gonna leach out, and it's gonna leach in.
And I think for black writing in particular, a lot of times people are saying things like, "Oh, this is so timely. It's so timely." Well, yeah, it's always going to be timely because some of the things we write about never change.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The McSweeney story is called Percy and the Fire Plums.
And I'm wondering if you give any thought to the criticism that, big publishing and the book award industrial complex's primary interest lies in Black writing that's centered on Black trauma and suffering or slavery and its aftermath. But we know, of course, in your work, you take on some of those topics and through satire, through humor. And certainly all three of us have written books that prove that it's not true, that the only thing that's getting published is our suffering. But I'm wondering if you give any thought to that criticism when you're writing.
Yeah, I think that we have to write what we're obsessed about. Big things and small things, and that's not the only thing that we're obsessed about as a people, as Black Americans and around the world. But it is one of the things. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about our pains, and of course we have to talk about our joys too. And I think a lot of people ignore the joys. Take for instance, I think one big example is Heavy by Kiese. I think a lot of people if you read reviews or interviews, they focus on the tragedies and the sadnesses, and that's a part of that book. But there's so much joy and laughter. The book is hilarious.
Yes, that Black abundance.
Right, Black abundance.
I was just, yes.
He puts it up front, and then a lot of people still ignore it, and so I think a lot of people, white, Black, everybody, oftentimes ignore the fact that we are writing about, the complexity of life.
And the realities, honestly, because, like, we're always in dark times. We always are. There are moments of laughter and, like, and that's reality for me. But it is interesting that, and I also felt like in my own work, like I felt people were picking up on it being like some of the more serious themes. And I was like, but there's some jokes in there too. Like, I feel like,
oh my gosh.
Right?
Absolutely. And I always forget the name of your character, Virgil. See, it came to me just then. Virgil alone, kept me in stitches. But it's I think about all the fashion and the art and there's so much that's joyful and funny.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you for seeing that. And I, of course, y'all are masters of humor. So I'm trying to learn from y'all.
Thank you. And I am learning from Rion, as I've said in pretty much like every third interview I do, that I did a satire workshop with Rion when the world first shut down and we were all in the house. And I took that as an opportunity to, learn from some of my favorite writers, including Rion, who, as we said, you're writing humor, you're writing satire. And so I'm curious who the Black humor writers are that amuse and inspire you.
Yeah, The Sellout is such a hilarious book. I just reread that for a class I was teaching. And the way what he does with rhythm, and language on the page is just hilarious. Percival Everett is another author who's always has something hilarious on every page. I mean, we could take it back to Twain. I mean, there are a lot of people. Nafissa Thompson Spires, Heads of the Colored People.
Course.
Is every time I reread it, is just. It's it's hilarity that is just ensuing on every page.
Yeah. Have you read, and Nana was our guest, Nana Nkweti's Walking on Cowrie Shells?
I haven't. I think I haven't.
You will love it.
I haven't read it. Yeah.
You will love it.
It's so good. So I have a two-part question, and it has to do with beginnings and endings, two things that I think you're especially great at. And so we're going to start with beginnings. Because the stories are so wildly imaginative, I have to ask you, can you take us through your generative process? Like, where does a story start for you?
I mean, it can start in a lot of different places. Like David Sherman, The Last Son of God, started with that first sentence. God is from Cross River. Everyone knows that. I can remember how that came about. That sentence is really not my own. I was in grad school. I was finishing grad school, and we were a lot of my friends. We were at dinner. And someone always says something brilliant, and I was always like, "Oh, can I use that? Can I use that?" And they would always say, "Yeah," but I would never use it. But I was going out into the world now, so I was kind of concerned. I was out of that, leaving that womb, and a friend of mine, Eugenia Susumi, said she had written some story where there's a sentence about God being Brazilian. I don't remember exactly the sentence, and I was like, "Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect." And I said, "God is from Cross River," and I went home and I wrote that.
Wow. And so you just riff on the sentence. It just sort of builds sentence by sentence?
Right. Yeah. I just, and my thought for that story was that I wanted to do something that was like how the Bible, treats God in Genesis, where he is on every different page. There's a different reality. He's omnipotent. Then he's not omnipotent. And then he's walking through the garden. And so I wanted to write something that treated God with that sense of differing reality.
Wow.
Kroger Delivery makes it easy to do your holiday shopping in a jingle. There might be a lot on your to-do list, but thanks to Kroger Delivery, you can get everything you need delivered straight to your door at the same great prices you'd find in store. Our refrigerated trucks always ensure that your groceries arrive fresh. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order of $75 or more and get free delivery with a Boost membership. Restrictions apply. See site for details. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
And then we'll get to the endings in a minute, but I'm fascinated because this just is so like based in play, which is something that I'm trying to do more of. So you riff on like a starter sentence. Do you just kind of let the story, do you just let it flow as you're writing, or do you kind of stop and take a minute to think about where it's going? How do you draft through the process?
I think it's both. If I get stuck, then yeah, I'm gonna stop and try to let my subconscious work on it for a little bit and come back to it. And then that may take a long time. And rolling to my sixth flow, that took me like, I don't know, 10 years to write, because I just kept coming back to it, and I wasn't mature enough as a writer, as a person to really to nail that until I was. But yeah, I think the sentence has to have a sense of bounce, a sense of funk, and then the next sentence, is a response to that, which kind of makes revision a little bit difficult because each sentence has a relationship with the last sentence. So sometimes you gotta break it up and then create new relationships between the sentences.
That is hard to do when you have like that bounce you're talking about. I really relate to that because it feels like a very tight weave, and it's very hard to like go back in if you have to and like pull that apart and have like the sentences working together in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then endings. There are stories of wildly different shapes and forms, and The World Doesn't Require You. Some that are closer to Flash in length, and then others, of course, including Special Topics and Loneliness Studies, which is a novella that unspool over time more slowly. At what point in the process does the shape of the story come to you? Like, how do you know when an idea should be contained or compressed? And when do you feel like, okay, this is something that requires more?
That's a good question. Like A Loudness of Screechers, I came into that knowing I was going to write a piece of flash fiction because I was writing that specifically for a publication for a flash fiction issue. And so, I went into that knowing that I had to compress it. Special Topics kind of got out of control. It got out of my hands. I'm writing it. I'm just like, oh my God, this won't stop. And so, I think each story is gonna find its own natural shape. David Sherman, it's about 30 typewritten pages, and I had really wished it was shorter. I'm always going for like a 15-page range. Sometimes the story it needs more than that.
Yeah, what is it about that 15-page? Like, it's like something we all have in our heads that it's like, oh, it's got to be 15 pages.
I don't know. So I don't know where that came from. Story has to be 15 pages, and we all believed it. But the stories are unruly. And what I really love, Flash is such a great challenge to me because I'm a Flash fundamentalist, right? If you have 1,001 words, you have a short story, you don't have Flash. So if I go in writing Flash, it's that challenge to can I create this whole world in 1,000 words?
Mm-hmm. I love that Flash fundamentalist. I think I am too, because it's like if they say 1,000, it's like I feel like I have to have exactly 1,000. And I took this 100-word workshop, a story workshop, and we were challenged to write 100-word stories. And each of mine, I had to make them exactly 100 words. See, I thought that was like Virgoism, but now I'm going to use Flash fundamentalist. It sounds better.
Words, that's a challenge, yeah.
Well, speaking of like these things that we were sort of told, academia. So the strictures and sometimes the ridiculousness of it seems to be a great source of inspiration for you. And so I'd love to know a little bit about your life as a teacher of creative writing, because I feel, all of us teach, and there are definitely certain things that I harp on my students about. So I'm curious, what are you always telling your students?
I think I'm always trying to tell them to be in the moment, And there's something that I have to tell myself too, because a lot of times, characters remembering something, and this happened, and that happens. Like, why why aren't you putting it? Why aren't you setting it in that particular moment? Why are you going off on 4 or 5 years ago? There's no particular reason why this character has to be thinking about 4 or 5 years ago. It's more urgent if you're actually putting it in the moment.
Mm-hmm. I bet your prompts are so good.
Right? Give us a prompt. Can you give us a prompt to save for later?
Let the people hear a prompt.
I have one prompt that I use. I always have students turn their feelings or their emotions of their day into a metaphor. And you do that for 10 minutes, and it can be tough because you're sitting there confronting yourself.
And you're laughing. Man, that's deep. Like, I'm sitting here thinking, if I had to do that right now, Jesus.
I've been doing it all summer, and, it's been a lot.
I don't know about y'all. I feel I want to, lean into prompts, but they immediately make me break out in anxiety because it, feels like a lot of pressure.
I know that
I don't
feeling.
know if you do anything to sort of relax your students into just going with it.
Yeah. We do a meditation. You usually put on some music, usually some jazz music or something instrumental. I do a guided meditation. Students really seem to like that. I started that during the pandemic. Because I was emotionally draining for everybody. And I had and I learned about meditation, and I felt, when you get something new in your life, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is everything. This is gonna change my life.
I must spread the word.
I must spread the word. And so I started figuring out how to work that into the class, and now that I know that it's just another thing, that it's a good positive thing, and it's not gonna all of a sudden make me float to the clouds. I think the best thing that I got out of it was being able to bring this into class. Students really like it.
And that's such a tender moment in a classroom, in an MFA classroom. And we need more of that because, so many people sound like they're recovering from their MFA programs, right, where there isn't a lot of tenderness and camaraderie and community. And so that's really lovely to hear that you have your students working hard, but you're also being gentle with them.
Yeah, it's important to me that the class is not this adversarial environment or this competitive environment, or that that people are being put down. Who am I to say this story is never going to work? But I'm going to try to guide you into directions that will work for you. So that's what it's about for me.
Future you faces some big expectations. Work out more, go to bed earlier, and most importantly, make smart money decisions. Thankfully, today you has Bank of America. One place with tools and guidance to help balance tasks from budgeting to saving, so you can just be you. With big plans, do more with the bank that asks, what would you like the power to do? Explore our tips and more at bankofamerica.com/futureyou.
And Dawnie mentioned the novella that is at the end of The World Doesn't Require You, that's set in academia, Special Topics and Loneliness Studies. And it is, as I've told you, one of my favorites in the collection. With it, you accomplish so many craft feats in terms of characterization and voice and so forth. And you're playing with form throughout. And we've talked about your playfulness as an approach to your work in general. But can you talk specifically about playing with form in your work?
Yeah, I think, I always try to write. If I play with form, it means that I couldn't tell the story in another way, in a straightforward way. I'm always trying to write in a general, straightforward way. But that is not true about Special Topics. In Special Topics, I went in, when I was teaching composition, they had 3 essays in a semester. Then they usually had a preliminary essay that wasn't graded and a final exam, and so the story was going to be told through those 3 to 5 essays. And so I started thinking about that, but then I was like, wait a second, what are the essays about? So I started writing a syllabus, and at that point, Rebecca Montana, my favorite character of all time, she was the main character. But then when I started writing the syllabus, it was clear to me that the main character had to be the professor. I was like, who is this crazy professor writing this syllabus about a loneliness class? And so then to understand him more, I had to write some more straightforward narration. And I started writing the straightforward narration, and I was writing it in third person. And then all of a sudden I got so bored with third person, so I typed the sentence, "It is I, Simeon Reese." And I was like, oh, wait, there's another character now. Who's this Simeon Reese? And
That's
so
a great name, by the way.
Yes.
It shifted into first person. And then, so there weren't 3 to 5 essays. There was only one major essay, which is probably the last thing I wrote. And then I figured that he had to have his students write these assignments. So the assignments were part of it.
And I love that.
Rion, I was just going to say, that sounds like jazz. Your process a little bit.
There's a lot of riffing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of riffing.
Yeah, just like the name occurs to you and you're just off on a different tangent. You're on an improvisation.
Yeah, it has to be fun and it has to be funky, So, I was writing it and, it wasn't fun. It was boring. So I was like, what's going to make this fun? Shifting the first person. Let's see what happens. And that reinvigorated the process.
I read something that I really love from a review of your first collection of stories, Insurrections. And this is what the reviewer said. In Amilcar Scott's stories, the ordinary becomes legend, and anything that self-righteously thinks itself sacred is taken down a few notches. One might say that he picks up Black tropes about Bibles, barbershops, and boxing matches in order to explode or comically deflate them. If this did not sound like something from a Sociology of Race Relations 101 class, and if there is one certainty, it is that this book is far more complex, far more interesting than what an over-serious academic text might make of it. End quote. And we see similar brilliant complications, themes, and takedowns in The World Doesn't Require You. So there are 3 years between these collections, at least the publication of these collections, I should say. Can you talk about your evolution as a writer between these 2 books?
Yeah, so, I came up with this world, came up with this place, Cross River, and I knew when I came up with it that this is this is for life, 'cause I was going to make a Mac 10 reference, faux life. This is faux life. And so, between those, David Sherman, The Last Son of God, I had that when I was writing Insurrections, but I knew that it would overpower the stories in Insurrection. It was a powerhouse story, and so I remember my editor was kind of like, "Do you have any other stories?" And I was like, "No." and I actually in my first collection, there's a story called Klan, and I was holding that for the second book too, but I put that in the first book, and that one is sort of weirdness. And I was kind of think of music as a template. I think Outkast, their first album is sort of weird. It's off kilter, but then it doesn't prepare you for what they go on to do. Mm-hmm. And I knew that everything after Insurrections would be less conventional. Insurrections was they're very consciously apprentice stories. I'm very consciously borrowing structures from my heroes, Edward P. Jones, August Wilson, Ernest Hemingway. I'm very consciously borrowing structures from just to figure out, I'm figuring out how to ride the bicycle at that point. And so I knew that The World Doesn't Require You would be different. I had that title. I had a bunch of titles, some of them completely ridiculous. There was Who the Fuck Are You?
Oh, wow.
Publishing, their eyebrows shot up at that one, I know.
They would make the little
I didn't share that one because that would have so ridiculous. That would have so ridiculous. There was no way I was going to walk into my mother's house and say, "Hey, Mom, my next book is called Who the Fuck Are You?" And what was I Want to Die Alone? That was another title. Ooh. Again, I'm not going to go, "Hey, Mom, my book is called I Want to Die Alone."
It's got to pass the mama test.
It has to pass the mama test, I knew that there was, it was going to be different. And so I went back and started, revising Roll Into My Six-Fold. That was another one that I had previously, but it just wasn't ready. And I thought that would be the last story. And I thought that Special Topics was going to be a long, short story. I didn't think it was going to be... I thought it was going to be in the middle of the book and it'd be a long, short story. And then it just grew out of proportion, and it only made sense to be at the end. So I think a lot of it was just it was a direction that I knew I was going to go in, being more bizarre, and being a lot more playful. And it was just, I sort of felt like I was able to loosen the strictures that I had set for myself.
Mm-hmm.
But kept it funky.
Kept it funky.
Yes.
It has to have funk,
Oh, I think that might be the headline for this episode. It has to have funk. I love it. So, Rion, you are delightful on Twitter, by the way, or X or whatever. No, we're never calling it
Twitter.
X. We're never calling it X. It is forever Twitter, okay?
I retweeted when someone said that his mama called it Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter.
Okay, yes.
That's pretty.
Yes. Nice. I especially love when you share anecdotes about your kids and about your life as a parent. And I think among my writer friends, there's like a lot of terror and angst around the decision to have kids or not and what it means for a writing career, which can often require lots of quiet, solitude, and sometimes a certain amount of selfishness. But I want to challenge that idea a little bit because you are doing incredibly well. And so I'm curious, in what ways has being a parent made you a better writer?
I think you get a lot more ideas. You have less time to execute, though. The one way that it made me better, the one very tangible way, is that I had a lot of terror when my wife was pregnant first. I would just not have any time to be able to write. And that's when I came up with that writing exercise. I started doing that so that, I knew that I could write something very quickly. And I didn't understand flash fiction previous to that. I didn't get it. And then I started really studying flash fiction. I was like, oh, this is what it is. And I started writing more flash fiction. And that had the effect of making my other stories a lot tighter. My stories used to go off on these tangents, and they would the sentences would be unwieldy. There was a lot of repetition in there that I couldn't see. That was the most common feedback I would get from on rejections, that this was very repetitive, and I couldn't see it. But I was able to see it once I started writing flash fiction. So I think my oldest son, he's the one who helped me to figure that out unwittingly.
I love that.
And you touched on this a little bit in talking about the feedback you got from editors and then addressing that in your work. Thinking about revision overall, is there a typical number of revisions for you? Can you take us through your process of revision?
Yeah, I generally don't write in drafts anymore. I revise as I go. So it's hard to say how many revisions. Usually when I open the file, I either, if it's short enough, I'll go back to the beginning, or right now I'm writing another novella, so I go up to a certain point, and then I revise as I go.
I do that too.
Yeah, the whole drafting doesn't necessarily work for me as it used to.
Yeah, that feels natural to me too, but it also frustrates me because it means that when I'm stuck, like I'm well and truly stuck for a good while until I can figure it out. And so sometimes I do wish I could do that drafting. Sometimes I wish my process was different, but I'm trying to learn to come to a peace with it.
Well, right now I was well and truly stuck, and I just had to let go and say I'm gonna do something akin to drafting, and then I'm just gonna write. I know it's bad. I'm just gonna keep going, and at some point I'm gonna stop and go back and do the sentence by sentence thing. But right now I'm just gonna keep going forward.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier a favorite character you have from your stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about her and why she's your favorite?
Yeah, Rebecca Montana. I get a smile every time I think about her. She is just so earnest and honest, and she didn't do well in school the previous semester, and she got back on a horse. I'm gonna do it this time, and and she's working in the story. She's working so hard. Every ridiculous thing the professor throws at her, she's there. She's bright faced and smart. She reminds me a lot of my niece. And, unfortunately, I put it through bad experience, but
I mean, you have to.
Yes.
You have to. The fiction demands it.
the fiction demands it. I just love that she's geared up to do well. And the professor just, she does well, and the professor doesn't like that.
It's a mess.
And he seeks to crush her.
So let's go back in time to your first ever short fiction publication and what you remember about that feeling, how long you'd been writing, when you claimed yourself as a writer, when the world saw you as a writer, sort of all that story of like the early days of Rion.
Yeah, I think the first one I had was in this literary magazine in undergrad at Howard University. I don't remember the name of the story, but it was a story about a labor protest. I think it was probably took place in the 30s or the 20s. I was probably reading about labor protests and the police around the protesters, and it was kind of heavy-handed. And they form a hexagon around the protesters and they beat them. And it was in an on-campus publication. I don't remember how excited I was about it. I remember it was something that I wrote for a class. E.R. Braithwaite, who wrote To Sir with Love, was my professor.
Yes.
And we used to read our stories in front of the class. And for me, it felt like this great big competition. In a positive way. I wasn't trying to crush anybody else, but there were several writers in that class that I loved hearing, and I wanted to impress them. And I think one of the students was running that literary magazine who published that story.
Beautiful. Also, I did not know you went to Howard.
I did. Yes, I did.
Yes, HBCU family. Yeah. I went to FAM.
Okay, all right.
That leads me to a question about how you feel like the HBCU experience maybe influenced you and your sensibility as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a Howard family. My parents met. There's a certain mentality that goes along with Howard that Ta-Nehisi Coates writes about it. They give you this sense of mission. You guys, wherever you are, you can go out there and you're making the world a better place. I remember that was the place where the Cross River concept comes from, even though I wasn't calling it Cross River. I was writing stories, and I would always stop in the middle. I knew that at some point it's like you have to finish a story if you're going to be a writer. that's one of the basic requirements.
Right.
So I remember I went to the library, and I would go to the library every night, and there was the graduate library, founders library, and there's undergraduate library. And founders library closed at I think it closed at midnight. Undergraduate library is 24 hours, and that's a party. There's no studying going on in the undergraduate library, Club UGL. But I would go. I would start in Founders, and I would go to Club UGL, and I would write until late at night, ignoring all my other classwork. I just had to finish this story. It's called The Legend of Old Cigar, and it's about a slave revolt. And when I thought of the idea of Cross River, a town founded after a slave revolt, I thought about that story. I finished that story, and I'm happy I finished it, and I knew it was bad when I was writing it. I've never gone back to look at it. I know where it is. It exists, but it served its function of saying you got to the end. And it was a precursor to everything I'm doing now. And I think that, a world that is Black and it's not perfect by any means, but there's some comfort in it, and that everyone is working towards their highest ideal. That comes from Howard. That definitely comes from Howard without even really thinking about it. That's where the concept originated. Mm-hmm. And being that my parents came from this environment, that's something that they put into my brothers and I growing up. So it was there with me before I got to Howard, but then it was completely reinforced when I was there.
So let's talk a little bit about the sometimes unpleasant business of writing. Can you talk about how you got an agent and also how you define success for yourself in this business?
Yeah, so my agent contacted me through X. I was just kidding. Twitter. She contacted me through Twitter, and I had met her before. But she contacted me, and I thought, it was great to me because I was getting somebody that was impressed by my work, that loved my work. And I think that's kind of what you want with an agent. So, it took me a little while to sign. I had to think about it and, do my due diligence. But that was the best outcome because I didn't really like the process of submitting to agents. I did it, and I got a bunch of rejections. And it felt like applying for jobs, and I hate that. So it was someone coming to me. I was like, oh, that's great. Okay. I was gonna make another hip hop reference like Biggie. I don't chase him, I replace him.
Hey.
Yes.
But yeah, someone coming to me was better to me than actually going out. And when after my first book won the Pendingham, I had agents contacting me all kinds of places. I don't know how they got my personal email address, called up my office at my job, and I was happy that I had an agent, that I didn't have to go with these with some of these people who may not feel the love, but see the dollar signs.
Right.
I want you to see the dollar signs, but I also want you to have the love there.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And your agent had read your work in journals, or how did they discover your work?
Yeah, probably literary journals. When I'm posting on Twitter, every time I had something published, I would you go there and you think that no one's reading it, but people are. People are reading your work, even if it feels like that you're just posting into an echo chamber.
Yeah. So then now that you've had the collections published and won awards, how do you define success?
That's difficult. I'm writing this linked narrative between stories that I call the Cross River Saga. To me, success is finishing the Cross River Saga. So I don't know if I'm going to be successful for years, and I think I get that from August Wilson. How he was, he had this 10 play cycle, and then he died right after he finished it. And I was like, when I saw that, I was like, man, I was really happy for him that he was able to complete that. And that's what I want. I don't necessarily have the parameters of when of what it's going to be, of what completion means. When it's complete, I'll know it. And to me, success is finishing the Cross River Saga.
Fantastic. We're curious about if you have a philosophy about ordering stories in your collections.
I'm glad you asked this one. Okay, so there are two things I love in music. I love The Doors, and I love Wu-Tang.
Yes.
So I think your first story has to punch you in the face, right? First story has to be Inspector Deck on Triumph.
I love it.
And the last story needs to be like the last song on the Doors album. It has to be The End or Riders in the Storm.
With the instrumentation, the sort of like.
Well, those songs are usually very apocalyptic.
Right.
On the first album, there's the End, which is like 10 minutes, and it's just on this stream of consciousness referencing, Greek literature, and it's just kind of crazy. And on the I think the Riders on the Storm is their last song, but it's very compact, but it's still It still feels apocalyptic. It's about this murderer, but it has to feel like that. My other reference is that it has to be back to Wu-Tang. It has to be a Capadonna on Winter Wars. It's this song that with multiple people on it. It's a posse song, but he comes to that last verse and he's just going on and on and on and on. I don't know how many bars that is, but it's very impressive. And so it makes the song echo in your head. And I think the last lines on that song echo. So your last story has to have that echo. And, I usually know I have a collection when I have the first and last story. I knew David Sherman was going to be first.
I love these music metaphors.
I was about to say,
So
this episode should come with a playlist. We got to have a playlist for this episode.
Yes. I'm so excited.
Yes. Who are you reading and loving right now?
Right now?
Or recently, let's say. Recently, right now.
Recently, there's Night of the Living Rez.
Yes,
it's a really good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. Let's see. Right now, I've sort of been out of fiction a little bit. I just read Hanif Abdul Rakib's "Go Ahead in the Rain," a book on Tribe Called Quest. And that's an incredibly beautiful book.
Do you play music, Rion?
Do I play music? No.
Yeah.
No, I have no musical talent whatsoever.
Oh, same here. And yet, I feel like we're both very attuned to and very inspired by music.
Yes.
And I'm curious, people ask me all the time if I played music or had any technical ability in that field, and I don't at all. And so I kind of tried to describe how I approached writing about music. And I'm wondering if you could do that for us as well, because you do write about music quite often. And your work has that bounce to it.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of music. I found like there's one time when I stopped really listening to music because I started getting into podcasts and didn't really have a whole lot of time because, a lot of music I listen to, I can't really listen to around my children. So in my free time, I was listening to podcasts, and I felt like my writing was just like, it was just flat. It didn't work. It was bent, So I started listening. So I was like, what am I missing? And I was like, okay, let's start listening to music again. And there it was. I tried to write with I can't listen to music while I'm writing,
Same. Yes.
Yeah, even instrumental music doesn't work for me most of the time.
Yeah.
I tried to write with a sense of rhythm, within the sentences, like I was saying, you make it funky, and then there's a call and response. So I feel like that musical tradition, the blues tradition, that my ancestors invented on, even before they were working, even before they were enslaved, is there within the sentences. And I'm really, the collection, or I'm working on a collection right now that I'm listening to a massive amount of music, just to be inspired by it. Yeah, because it's partly about a musician. So. A musician friend of mine was, asked me, he's like, "Did you play music?" We hadn't seen each other since junior high or high school, and he's like, "Do you play music?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Man, you got it right," and that felt really good to hear.
It does feel good, yeah. So I won't ask you what the stories in the new collection are about, but as a tease, I'm curious what the music is that you're listening to that's inspiring.
It's a lot. I'm listening. Whenever I hear about something, I'm putting it into Spotify and listening. This is something that couldn't be done with if we were in a different era of music. I'm able to go back and listen to all kinds of music that I miss. So right now I'm listening to a Tribe Called Quest, which I didn't miss, which was one of my favorite groups of all time. But I get to listen to it, with some nuances that I would have missed as a teenager. So it's a lot, There's in my work, there's always some kind of Wu-Tang reference. Going back and listening to a lot of jazz that I didn't know about. In my world, there's River Beat, which is the town's indigenous music, and that is basically, in my mind, that's basically to create that, I got to throw everything into the pot like a gumbo, and that's the music. And hopefully, it'll sound different to every reader. So it sounds one way to me, and it'll sound a different way to you.
I'm definitely intrigued.
I do have one last question inspired by us talking about music. You know how we say your top 5 MCs. All right. Your top 5 MCs and your top 5 either writers or books. No pressure. No pressure.
Prompt.
Oh, man.
I'm sweating.
Yeah, top 5 MCs. Yeah, I hate this question. No offense, Deesha, you know I love you, but let's see. Rakim is such an innovator. People couldn't do what they're doing now without Rakim. I would say the Jizza, Chuck D. Andre 3000 is there.
You got one more. Just one.
I got one more. This is kind of male heavy, so I'm gonna say Latifah.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
She, my list is people that should be in people's that I've never seen in the top 5 that should be there, except for Rakim.
Yeah.
But they should always be there. Latifah is just so amazing, man.
Yep.
I go back and listen to her rhymes, and it's just like, damn. She had an album. She got a song with KRS-One, and again another person we're not talking about anymore. But
yeah.
Even in his height, she killed him on that song, and people forget that, when Foxy Val tried to diss her.
I didn't know she came for Queen Latifah. Wow.
She had these 2 songs. It was just like, no. And that was just it. And Foxy Val never recovered from that in my mind.
Wow.
So she's incredible MC.
So, Mitchell was playing in our faces with this list on Esquire recently, Mitchell S. Jackson. He had...
Oh, man.
Did you see it?
Me and Mitch have these debates. We always want to get into Mitch's taste in music.
All right.
Hey, look, there's the best dressed dude in lit, but you can't tell me E40 is one of the greatest.
Oh, we love you, Mitch, though.
Write a short story so we can have you on.
He has some great short stories, actually.
Okay, I've been sleeping on Mitch. All right. Okay, your other 5.
Oh, okay. Well, the other 5. I'm gonna put a 6 on my list and say Kendrick for my other one. Invisible Man's my North Star.
Okay.
That one's always popping up in my work, even when I try not to let it pop up in my work. Are we doing short stories?
Yeah, we can do short stories.
Of
course.
Oh, okay. Well, I gotta take Invisible Man off.
Okay. No. I mean, I think I thought you meant could we include? I think it could be any. Let's say any fiction.
Any fiction.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, okay. So we put Invisible Man back. There is Women of Brewster Place. That's an incredible book.
Gloria.
Winesburg, Ohio. That book is quite amazing.
Yeah, linked collection around place,
right?
Like yours.
Yeah. And I think without those two books that I just mentioned, there would be no Cross River.
This is hard.
It is hard. It's Miguel Street by
V.S. Naipaul.
V.S. Naipaul, my countryman. V.S. Naipaul. That's another one. Let's see. Drinking Coffee Elsewhere. That's easy. Let's see. Before You Suffocate Your Own Full Self.
Absolutely.
Danielle.
Absolutely.
How many is that? Was
I
that
think
5?
so.
I think you might have done 6.
Okay.
I don't know.
But
I'm terrible at math.
I was listening, just like picturing each one.
Count.
So sorry, wasn't counting.
No, that is. Woo! You have given our listeners such food today.
Oh wait! Sula.
Yeah.
How could I forget Sula? What am I doing?
Favorite Tony. Okay, we got to do a whole other thing about this. Akili from the Books of Pop Culture podcast threw a copy of Sula in the trash. He does not. What? I know, right? Just being inflammatory.
So I saw another bookstagrammer, a different one, do the same thing recently, and I said, "Excuse me,
Sula.
what?"
I'm like, "What is the Sula hate? It's my favorite Toni Morrison.
All right, so this is how I came upon Sula. I was in this honors English class in high school, and I was not a good student. But I was such a my 9th grade English class. I did so well. The teacher was like, you gotta go off for honors English. And I was just not a person who was, I was in the class and I was with a bunch of people that I didn't know. So I was the class clown, and and everyone's kind of looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I wasn't doing well in that class because I focused so much on class clowning and trying to impress this one girl. And so I'm about to fail out of class about honors English, and I'm like, Rion, you love reading, you love writing. why you're an intelligent person. Why are you failing out? And so the teacher assigned Sula. I went home. I was like, I didn't know Toni Morrison. I was like, okay, a Black author. I have to read this, and if I'm going to do well in this class. So I opened it, and it was a Sunday. I remember sitting on my bed reading it in one day.
Wow.
And imagine being 16, right, and thinking and reading Sula in one day and thinking you understood it.
I was a full-grown adult before I could really understand any of Toni Morrison's work. Yeah, I feel like I started it so many times and I had to stop because I wasn't ready. And now it's like reading them again and again and getting something different every time.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an incredible book. I love that book more than anything else.
This has been such a fun, great conversation. We've given the people reading lists. We've given them playlists. We've given them prompts. Like, you have been an immaculate guest. Thank you so much, Rion, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you like what we're doing at URSA, be sure to share this podcast with your friends. And if you'd like to support us directly, become an URSA member by going to ursastory.com/join. You'll help fund production of this show and keep us going. We'll see you next time.